everyone, this is the first in a series of videos that I'm starting to make all about LiPo batteries and connectors for your 2S micro drones. I'm doing this because I've already helped a lot of people online with the Beta 75X, 65X, or other similar builds, and I get questions about batteries and connectors probably more than anything else. Maybe you're somebody who's recently purchased a new drone and you're wondering what kind of batteries you can use. There's a lot of them out there. I'm going to cover this in a future video. Maybe you're somebody who's looking to optimize your experience, or you're just a tinkerer and a builder like I am. Whatever the case, I hope you find this information interesting, and I hope it helps you get out there and have fun enjoying the awesome hobby of micro FPV. For this video, I'm going to focus on the setup where we use two 1S batteries like these and a double pigtail connector like this to connect them in series and effectively create a 2-cell battery. If you buy the Beta 65X, it's going to come with a pigtail like this, and the frame is designed to hold those batteries. If you buy a Beta 75X from Beta FPV, there's a drop-down choice. You can choose this, or you can choose an XT30 connector like this. And we're starting to see other drones on the market, like the new Mobula 7. It will also come with a connector like this. So it's a very popular setup, and for good reason. There's a lot of advantages to this setup. For a lot of people, it's going to make it easier to get into 2S whoops, and I think that is fantastic. But make no mistake, the performance of this is not the same as using a 2-cell battery. I wanted to know what the difference would be. I considered doing some side-by-side kind of scientific tests. I didn't have time to do that, but I did mod my Beta 65X. It looks a little different now because of the camera, but the real difference is right here. It now has an XT30 connector on 18 gauge wire. That's like a fire hose of current pouring into this drone. And I'm no longer motivated to do direct side-by-side comparisons because the difference in performance is just so obvious. If you're looking for the maximum performance, using a 2S battery is going to unlock that power for you. But that setup is not for everyone. Like I said, there are advantages to using this double PH2 setup, and so I'm going to go through some of the pros and cons with you. And at the end, I'm going to show a flight video of using the new setup. Now, the first and probably biggest advantage of using this setup is that you don't have to run out and buy a bunch of 2-cell batteries. These are some examples, but maybe you don't have any 2-cell batteries or the ability to charge them yet. But maybe you've been flying tiny whoops for a while, so you have a whole bunch of batteries like these. If you can use the batteries that you already have, that certainly makes it easier to get into the air with a new setup. And for many of you, this will be enough of a reason to choose this setup all by itself. And the good news is, even if you start out this way and later decide that you want to try 2-cell batteries, it is not particularly difficult to replace this connector. So you could start with these and decide later if you want to try something else. Quick note, if you later on do decide to replace this connector with an XT30 or any other connector, I suggest you replace the entire lead. Don't just cut these off of the ends and stick an XT30 on here, because this 24 gauge wire is not really up to the current either. The other main advantage of the PH2 setup is weight. There you can see the pigtail connector, about 1.2. And this is an actual connector from a 75X, which I trimmed. That's not enough wire, so we'll add in some more wire. I know this isn't exact, but you can see we're going to be adding approximately 1 gram switching to this connector. But what makes a bigger difference is the batteries. Here's a pair of 260s, 14.14. Here's a pair of 300s, 15.33. And then if we go to 2-cell with this same capacity, this is the single lightest battery that I have. It's the Nanotech 35C. Let me make sure I get all the wires on here. And it's almost 17 grams. So if we put that together, I think you can expect that the all-up weight of a build with the PH2 connector is going to be 2.5 to 3 grams lighter than a build with the same milliamp hour capacity using a 2-cell battery and an XT30. And that's if it's a really light 2-cell battery. There are much heavier 2-cell batteries out there, and so you're going to be adding even more weight. If you were looking for the absolute lightest build, then the PH2 setup might help you get there. Another advantage to this setup is that it makes charging really cheap and easy. This is like a $20 charger. I've seen variations of this with different labels. I got this on Amazon. But this can charge 6 different 1S batteries at the same time. And it's not parallel charging, so they can be at different levels of charge, and it doesn't matter. You just stick them in here. If you're at an event or something, it's just really great to just be able to keep popping them back on there. You can charge it from a larger battery. They're just really convenient and not very expensive. I'm not saying the quality is amazing, but the convenience is definitely there. Another advantage of the 1S setup is this. Imagine that one of your cells goes bad. If that happens, you can take that one out of circulation and replace it with another one, but this cell is still totally usable. If that happened with a 2-cell battery, like one of these, you would probably end up disposing of the entire battery because most people aren't going to try to open these up and do that surgery. A downside to this setup is that PH 2.0 connectors are just not very durable. It's not a problem with this setup from Beta FPV. These ones are actually pretty nice. But the creator of these connectors rates them for 30 mating cycles, which means they think you ought to be able to plug in a battery and unplug the battery 30 times, and it should be good for that. But after that, it's maybe time to think about replacing. I don't know about you, but I plan on using my drone more times than that. And it may last for a long time, and it may not. So be on the lookout. If you're ever flying and you feel like the drone kind of falters in the air in a way that it didn't used to do, or if you just feel like it's sluggish and you start flying and immediately the voltage is way lower than you expected it to be, and you've got kind of a loss of power and you're like, I swear it used to be more powerful than this, you're probably right, and the problem might be these connectors. If you're going to go with this setup on a 2S Whoop, or any Whoop for that matter, I suggest you get a bunch of additional connectors. Beta FPV sells these in a bag. You could get those. Really, if you've got any PH2 connector like 1S pigtail sitting around, it's pretty easy to build a 2S connector like this. You just need the wire to go from one to the other, as you see here. So those are some of the practical considerations. There are good reasons why someone might choose to use this PH2 setup. If you use this on your drone and you love it, more power to you. But for me, I already told you that I switched mine to an XT30 so that I could run 2-cell batteries. And the reason for that is performance. When I reviewed this, I made a whole video. If you haven't seen that, check out the link down below. But, I said it was fast, it's fun, it's awesome, but I complained a lot about the voltage sag. Almost as soon as you take off, that voltage drops way down low, and stays low for the whole flight. And it's not just numbers on the OSD. It is absolutely something that you can feel, especially late in the flight when the voltage is going to be sagging naturally. Anyway, late in the flight with that low voltage is when I have the most problem with washouts, problems pulling out of dives, bottoming out on power loops, and that sort of thing. When I switched it to XT30, I could immediately both hear and feel the power. It was faster, it was more solid, but importantly, it was more consistent. Originally, I mentioned in my review that it's hard to do 2 big moves with the PH2 setup in a row. You do one, the voltage sags, but it's okay. You try to do a second one and the voltage hasn't recovered yet, and you're going to bottom out or something. On the XT30, I found the performance to be much, much more consistent. So why is that? It comes down to current. The reason this setup is so much lighter than a 2-cell battery, at least one of the reasons, is because everything about it is designed for lower current, which means it doesn't have to use as much conductive material. This is 24 gauge wire, and if you look past the silicone wrapper, it's really pretty tiny, and if you stretch it out, there's about 15 centimeters of it. So all of the current has to pass through all of that wire, has to pass through 2 pairs of these connectors as well. And both the wire and the connectors are rated for 2 amps. I think that's a continuous rating. I don't know over what distance. I don't know what the burst rating is, but they're not designed to handle much current. And when you overload it, you're going to get more resistance. And as heat builds up, the resistance is going to go up even more. And then inside of the battery, of course, there's the pins here, which connect to the tabs. And there's 4 tabs because you've got to go into and out of both batteries, as opposed to having a single plate between them, which might give you a better connection there. Anyway, there's just a lot of ways to get resistance. All the little bits of resistance add up, and that resistance is what pulls down your voltage. So to help you understand this, I want to show you some flight footage and some charts that I made. The first flight was the one from my review of the 65X. It used these batteries, and it looked like this. If you look in the lower left, you can see the average cell voltage as recorded by the OSD. Just 6 seconds from takeoff and it has dropped to 3.2 volts per cell, and it's going to stay low through the entire flight, although it does fluctuate quite a bit based on how I'm flying. And then just 1 minute and 20 seconds in, you can see the loss of power is really starting to affect the performance. I just bottomed out on this maneuver. To help you visualize what's happening, I wrote down the voltage from the OSD at 10-second intervals and made this graph. Now, if you've looked at LiPo burn down charts before, you'll know that this is not how it should look. This drop off at the beginning is way too steep. Within the first 10 seconds, we've already lost most of the voltage, and it will stay low through the entire flight. You can see it never once broke above the 3.3 volt threshold, although there was a lot of fluctuation. The fluctuation represents changes in what the quad is doing. I might lunge ahead or do a power loop, causing the voltage to drop, and then I might ease off, causing it to rebound. The fact that the voltage is so low through the entire flight is what robs the craft of the thrust that it might have. And the fact that it fluctuates so much based on the maneuvers is what makes it unpredictable how much thrust you will have at any given moment. And then if you look at the end of the flight, you can see when the battery is really done, the voltage just falls off of a cliff. It ended at 2.7 volts per cell, which is way too low. I don't normally push my batteries that far. I just wanted to see what would happen in this case. At this point, I want to remind you that we're looking at the voltage as recorded by the OSD, and that means the voltage that made its way all the way to the flight controller stack, and that's the voltage that might be useful feeding to your motors. This is different than the voltage at the actual cells. I wish we had a way to measure that, because the difference would tell us just how much voltage was lost due to all of the wires and connectors. In that flight, I was using these Beta FPV 260 milliamp hour batteries. They were not HV charged, just regular charge. And like I said, these batteries are not actually that great. For this build, you want really high performance batteries. So the next thing I wanted to try was these 300 milliamp hour batteries by Beta FPV. I've had good success with these, although I've heard mixed reviews from other people. Some people say they're great, some people think that they're not. I can't speak to that. The ones that I've gotten seem pretty good, and they definitely give more flight time, but it's still fundamentally the same problem as you'll see in this flight here. Now this flight took place in a different location, but also one with a lot of space, plenty of room to do a bunch of high throttle maneuvers. If you've been watching the voltage in the lower left, you'll see it manages to hold on to that higher voltage for a little bit longer, but it ultimately dips down below that 3.3 volt line and stays there for the rest of the flight. Now the best thing would be to compare two flights that were completely identical except for the battery, and I don't have that kind of data, and you might say that I shouldn't compare these two flights against each other because they're so different. I don't discount that, but I'm going to show it to you anyway because I think if you see through the noise, the trends that we see here are very representative of the experience that I've had with these batteries over multiple flights. So the orange line you see here is that second flight with the 300 milliamp hour 1S batteries and the PH2 connectors. As you can see, the drop-off at the beginning was only marginally better. The peaks and valleys in the middle were just as bad, although the average voltage may have been a little bit higher. And then it definitely did last a little bit longer before landing the flight at 2 minutes and 20 seconds. So now let's take a look at what happened after I switched to this XT30 connector and 2S batteries. The battery that I have that's the most like these 300 milliamp hour 1S batteries is the 300 milliamp hour 2S battery by Beta FPV. So this is what I used for the next set of tests. They're both the same capacity. This one claims a 35 to 70 C rating, whereas these claim a 30 to 60 C rating. So the C ratings are very similar. The main difference is the connectors here and here. This one has 18 gauge wire going all the way to the cells and an XT30U connector on the end. I mentioned that it's 18 gauge wire. Some of you may have this battery with 20 gauge wire. There seems to be different batches out there. These are the ones that I received and these are the ones that I'm testing. So here's some footage of flying around in my backyard. This is one of the first outdoor tests that I did with the new setup, and I already posted a clip of this on my YouTube channel. Immediately I could feel that I had more power and more control and more consistent response throughout the flight. Keep an eye on the voltage of this flight. This is much more like the voltage behavior that I would expect from a larger quad, and that is really good to see. Now my backyard is not that big, so I'm not using quite as much sustained high throttle in this flight. That makes it hard to compare, but I'm not going particularly slow either. The gray line you see here is that 200 milliamp hour beta FPV 2S battery with XT30 flying in my backyard. As you can see, the voltage remained much higher through the entire flight. That initial fall off lasted for 30 seconds before it kind of leveled out, and it stayed above 3.5 volts all the way up until 1 minute and 40 seconds in. It never dropped below that line. I also want you to see just how consistent the voltage is through this center section of the flight. It slowly declines almost linearly, and I was not flying at constant speed. I was popping up over the house, I was doing flips and then leveling out. Through all of those changes in activity, the voltage was very steady, and that steady voltage is what gives you that dependable response on the throttle whenever you need it. It's very different than the peaks and valleys that you experience when flying on the PH2 connector. But like I said, this is not a fair comparison at all because I was not using as much high throttle in this flight in my backyard. So let's take that same battery and take it outside into a larger space. In this flight, I really lay on the throttle, and I stay on high throttle for long bursts at a time. I'm pushing this harder than I've ever pushed the PH2 setup because the voltage would just be completely through the floor on the PH2 setup. But I'm able to do it here, and I want you to see this whole flight at the end. But for now, let's look at the graph. The yellow line you see here is that last flight with the same 300 milliamp hour 2-cell battery. I really pushed it hard at the beginning, and so that made the throttle drop off faster than in my backyard. And I continued to be on high throttle, so the voltage was a little bit lower, but it stayed right between 3.4 and 3.5 volts for almost the entire flight. It really wasn't until 2 minutes and 30 seconds that it started to drop significantly below that. Again, look how consistent the voltage is in this center section of the flight. Even though this flight was much faster and harder than any of the others, you can see that the average voltage is still well above that of either flight with the two 1S batteries and the PH2 setup. And the difference between these lines basically shows you how much voltage is lost in those wires and connectors. Looking at these graphs, I would say that an average of somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3 volts is the difference that you're going to see across the entire flight. That is a really big difference, and it translates to a difference in thrust that you can definitely feel. Keep in mind that the difference between a fully charged battery and one that is too drained to fly is only about 1.0 volts total. Hopefully this video has given you a better understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of using the 2x1S setup compared to using actual 2-cell batteries like this. And hopefully you can now understand why I use 2-cell batteries on all of my builds and why I converted the Beta 65X to work this way as well. The performance is just so much better and so much more consistent with the 2-cell batteries that is the choice that I make, even though I have to give up some of the conveniences of using these 2-cell batteries. All of the tests that I showed you were with my Beta 65X. I've never flown the 75X with the 2x1S setup. I don't intend to, but I expect that the results would be fairly similar. The electrical requirements of these two builds are certainly fairly similar. Another thing I want to point out is that the tests I showed you were with this 35C battery. This is not a particularly high performance battery. I was using it just because it's comparable to these. Once you have a real 2-cell connection, you can use much more powerful batteries like this Max Amps, or you can go to even larger ones like this G&B battery. I will be showing you all of these in future videos, so stay tuned. My point is, once you've got that XT30 connector on there, you've actually got a lot of choices about size and weight, and those are going to affect the flight characteristics, the performance, and your flight time, but you have those options. So again, thanks for watching, and In the next video, I will show you exactly how I mount the batteries on the 65X and how I mount larger batteries that don't normally fit on the Beta 75X. I'm also going to talk about wire length, wire gauge, and connectors. And then after that, I'm going to show you all of the 2-cell batteries that I currently have. Again, there's a whole box of them here, and hopefully that will help you understand the choices that are out there. In the meantime, I'm going to leave you with the rest of the footage from that last flight. While you're watching it, try to keep in mind that it's this build right here, a 65mm Whoop that you are watching. Have fun, happy flying.